everybody, it's Lawn Therapy. I'm Justin Berg with Purple Care, and today I've got Mason Marshall from Texas A&M on our show. We're going to talk a lot about, I think, maybe some different bugs, some ornamentals, what you do here. So just tell us kind of your background, tell us what you do here for an A&M, and tell us kind of a little bit about you.
Sure. So thank you for having me here. My name is Mason Marshall. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Horticulture. I actually transferred here in 2017 and received my bachelor in horticulture. Soon followed up with my master's, and then now I'm working on my PhD in horticulture. I got interested in this field in high school. I really didn't know it existed, or I didn't even know the word horticulture. And some locals that had a garden center took a chance on me, and they trained me for over 2 years and got me interested in A&M. So I came here and fell in love with our department and everything we have to offer. And that's why I've stayed here to get my degrees.
Very good. When I say the word ornamentals, what does that mean to you? How do you define that?
So when I think of ornamentals, I think of pretty plants, lots of color. I like formalized garden settings, so like heavy lines and things like that. So lots of colors, annuals, less greenery and shrubs, but those are still ornamentals too.
Sure, sure. So I was going to ask if you like English gardens, but by what you just said, that would be, I don't know if you like English gardens.
I do. I mean, I appreciate all garden styles, old cottage gardens, Texas gardens, English gardens, and, you know, a lot of our old cottage Texas gardens were influenced by English gardens, and we have one outside in the gardens here. So I really do appreciate all styles.
Very good, very good. You said you like pretty flowers, or pretty plants. What are some of your favorites? What are some of you that really do well in Texas?
It really depends on the year, but petunias, depending on the cultivar, can be a solid choice. We have petunias outside at least 2 to 3 times a year here. Vinca is always a winner. Vinca does well in the heat, and that's hard to find something that does well in the heat here. What else would be a good one? Blue Days. We like to use our volvulus outside, and that's always a winner in the heat here, especially drought tolerant. So
you're a big annuals. You like your annuals?
I love my annuals. Yes. I can grow my perennials, but I like to grow annuals a lot.
Very good. Let's just pretend that someone listening today has no idea what a perennial is versus an annual. Define that. You've got the master's degree to define that for these guys.
Sure. So an annual plant completes its life cycle within one season or a growing year, usually within the spring or spring to summer, whereas a perennial can take more than one season, usually 1 to 2 years to continue to grow. Think of like shrubs, peonies, things of that nature that continuously come back every season. Lantanas, yes, lantana is a solid plant for our area too. So
yeah, very good. I with the annuals, as a landscaper, I love perennials because it's just, I like, and I still like the annuals, but I always tell people, you've got to pepper in some annuals. You have to. There's nothing as more color. Like one thing I try to get across people, like, listen, the perennials are kind of your base. That's kind of your base and your shrubs. Like let's get some greenery in there, right? Let's get some.
Absolutely.
And let's get some perennials so that we can have, things get, because they do. I mean, perennials do get better and better over time. I mean, I've got some perennials that have been around for 5, 6, 7 years, and man, they are unbelievable. I mean, they look way better now than they did 3 years ago, and they just really grew on me. But you have to still have annuals. Now, some people don't like it because I'm like, well, I got to plant them every year. I got to buy them every year. I'm like, that's actually part of the fun, by the way.
It is, but it's good you bring that up because the cost part is a big thing for consumers. And most consumers don't want to go out and buy several $100s worth of annuals, and you need to have those perennials. One thing that's funny for me, I'm from Odessa, Texas, so the desert, very different from here, very different plants. I've never seen an azalea most of my life. I was in school, and so I never had that time to travel in the spring and see azaleas. And when I came down here, I went up to the Dallas Arboretum, and I finally saw azaleas in full, and I was mind blown. So that perennial color is so important in the landscape and how you pepper it in.
Yeah. One thing, people see those and then they want them. And the problem is what the Dallas Arboretum is not telling you, and they did it correct, is that they pack those things with peat moss. They packed them with incredibly acidic soil.
Yes.
And they constantly amend the soil. There is the azaleas. It's funny. I have this conversation every single year. I have this conversation with somebody that says, I want azaleas in my garden. I'm like, listen, I can do it. I can put them in. They're going to live. They're not going to look good. Whatever you saw, they're not going to look that well. I saw them in Dallas. I'm like, they're not.
It takes a lot of work.
If you're willing to put in a tremendous amount of time, constantly amend the soil, put in the right fertilizers, water correctly, yes, you will have that. But most people do not have the time, nor do they want to. But yeah, that's a great
True.
example. Like we
Yeah.
talk about azaleas all the time, like because once you go to Georgia or just where the azaleas look amazing there. In my mind, they do. It's like that's what they want. And like we're just, especially I think where you guys are, College Station. It's even worse for azaleas. I mean, it's even harder to grow.
Absolutely. Yeah, you don't really see them here.
No, you shouldn't. I mean, they grow, but man, they just don't. They look really leggy, and they don't like it. They really don't want to be here. They don't. They'll live, but they don't want to be here.
Well, and that's the hard thing about Texas is we're so large, and so you have so many different environments for plants, and so
many
that's hard to
biomes.
cater to consumers.
Yeah, yeah. Which I like. I mean, it's funny. No matter where you go, everyone thinks they've got it really bad. Like, oh, we've got freezes and we've got heat. And here, oh, we've got salt in our water. Oh, we've got no rain. I mean, every place is.
We all have problems.
We
yeah.
all have problems, and and that's okay. I mean, that's what kind of makes it interesting, I think.
Sure.
And you just got to figure out what your area requires and what it can and can't have. And once you figure it out, you got it. I mean, I know what I can and can't plant in my area. In Tarrant County, I'm up in the DFW area, and there's just a few things you guys can plant here. There's a handful of things that you can plant here that I can't. It's not a big list, but there is a list of things that you've even got some of them here. I know I'm not a big palm fan. I love palms, but man, we have a really heavy freeze once every probably 3 to 5, and you'll see dead palms all over DFW, and it just you can get them, but you better be ready to cover them. Cover them. Get heat on them. I mean, it's a lot of work to get them to live, and it's just I don't think that's really what nature. If nature says they don't belong, I go with what nature says.
Sure.
So there's a lot of hype around you. That's why we're interviewing actually, because there's been other department heads, PhDs that have said you've got to talk to this Mason Marshall kid. And so, what's that all about?
I'm not sure. I appreciate your support. I try to be involved as much as I can. I think it's really important to help out and always lend a hand because one day you're going to need a hand. And I think that's part of learning as much as you can while you're at a university like this. Whether it's with someone like Dr. Ong, he's been a great mentor and given me advice on like a mealy bug we'll talk about. But it's just getting involved and helping out others. And I know everybody has a busy life, but sometimes you have to make those sacrifices to help out, and sometimes it'll come back. So
yeah, the Lisa Whittlesey.
Yes,
she's an impressive lady, by the way, very impressive.
I love her. Yes,
she's very impressive, but she talks heavily about giving and contributing back and helping others. And that's kind of neat. And it's been actually it's been interesting. It's been a very consistent theme. Here with the people here that we've interviewed at A&M, that whether it be Joseph or whether it be Dr. Ong, I mean, it's been really impressive that everyone's very giving, and they want people to get outside. They want people to be in nature. They want people to to garden. They want they don't just want to sell you what they have here. They really want people to genuinely want. I feel it. They genuinely want.
Yeah, horticulture's fun.
Yeah, it is supposed to be, and it gathers people. I mean, you can be in a garden by yourself, but it's fun to do it with your family. It's
Sure.
kind of just like you guys. I mean, I've been watching the gardens as I've talked to different people here, and there's people out here together. I mean, there's groups of kids that just sit out in the garden. It's really neat. Even the workers. I mean, there's people that work, and there's kids, there's professors. It's been kind of neat being able to sit in this building because I got a view of the garden and watching what happens out here. It's been pretty amazing. So. Tell me more about this mealy. Did you actually discover this mealy bug, or
no? So last year, a cohort of people had went down to Florida to the National ASHS meeting, which is the American Society of Horticulture Science. And I believe it was Dave Creech at SFA. He had posted a picture of a mealy bug that was on muhly grasses, and a couple of weeks went by and I was walking by the pathology building of all places and kind of had deja vu and said, oh, I've seen that. And so I had to go back and find this picture. Turns out I contacted another PhD student at Clemson, Corey Tanner, and he's working on logging locations where it's been seen. And so it had been apparently seen here in Texas in the Houston County. That's about where it's at right now. But we formally saw it out here on campus, and so we sent them off to the USDA up in Beltsville, Maryland. That's their main center for identification, and they did confirm it was the mealy bug. So essentially, it is exclusive in a sense to muhly grass, and it decimates them. It just looks like a snow white muhly grass, and there's not a lot you can do for control besides more harder pesticides, which we try to stay away from. So it's definitely one thing growers want to be looking for, wholesale growers, especially in Louisiana. I personally think it arrived here off of plants we got somewhere else. A lot of plants in the nursery trade come from more of the southeast area, especially grasses. So that's my theory. But we did put out a fact sheet not long ago. It's on AgriLife eLearn, so people can read about it and learn to identify it.
Yeah, it's interesting when you bring in different varieties or just even plants from like different areas that have maybe adapted, and then you introduce something, and then it just it's actually very detrimental, even though it's, I mean, like kind of like when they introduced the mongoose to other islands. I mean, that mongoose came in and they brought it in to get rid of snakes, but it wiped out everything, and so now they're a major issue, so.
Well, in
It's
crepe myrtles, we mentioned that earlier with the bark scale. When I had come to A&M about 8 years ago, Dr. Mung Mungu was working on that topic with the bark scale. And since then, almost every single crepe myrtle I've seen here on campus and around town is infested with them, and just in that amount of time. And so it's time for that discussion, and we've been having that discussion, but alternatives for plantains and how to try to mitigate that pest.
Yeah, I know it's if you really got to have a crepe myrtle, then we'll get it for you.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
I really try to push people towards even a Vitex, which is one of my favorites. It's durable. I mean, it takes water, no water, heat,
Yes.
no heat. You can do about anything you want to that thing.
Very easy to grow.
Yeah, you can hit it, you can spit on it. I was saying it's gonna grow. It's durable. I'm not suggesting you do that, but it's a great plant. It's gorgeous too. It's beautiful purple blooms on it. So I'm pretty partial to that. But it's a great alternative to a crepe myrtle.
Yes.
It really is. So what's maybe an alternative to, if you got to have mealy grass, you got to have muley grasses. What's an alternative to maybe a muley grass?
Um, Trying to think some good alternatives. I mean, that I would plant in the landscape. It's not going to be nearly as large, dense canopy, but something like blue stem, and that would provide more of an ecosystem service. That's a big topic now and it has been in the past. But what can that plant provide for your landscape? And many know that's a big plant for quail habitat and bird nesting. So blue stem grasses, after they get bigger over a while. Trying to think of another. Bamboo muley grass. It's actually a type of Bermuda grass, and it grows more sort of like bamboo, but still has a large floriferous type canopy. So
Yeah, those are good choices. I
yeah.
like those. Yeah, very good choices. So tell me more about your work with wildflowers.
So I work with Dr. Michael Arnold. He's the director of the gardens, and he works with Joseph Johnson. They started working on a wildflower a few years ago with Dr. Caitlin Hopkins. It's Mexican hat, or Rotibita columnifera. It's prairie coneflower, and it exists through almost all 48 contiguous U.S. states. You see it all across Texas and all of our environments. It exists in kind of a red to a yellow or just a bicolor. So we have taken this plant and we are growing a diversity panel in the field. We have over 300 plants, and it turns out the diversity is extreme, which is good and bad. There's a lot to examine, but we have many different foliage and floral types. We have dwarf architecture, small leaves, long leaves. We also have plants that look like they'd make cut flower candidates. So currently, we have made some selections from that, different architectures that we like. And the current plan is to start crossing those and creating some hybrids. And then we also have what we presume to be natural hybrids. These plants all started from seed that Dr. Arnold collected. And those that know, when you collect seed, the genetics can be wild because it's open pollinated. And this plant has to be open pollinated. It can't be, it's male sterile, so it can't pollinate itself. So some of the selections that we've had so far, we have some things like very light lemon color flowers. Most of the flowers on this droop down, and we have some that droop up, kind of like a little Victorian collar. I'm really fond of those. We have really small architecture that has very long stems, and we want to use those for some cut flower research to see if you can have some native wildflowers as a cut flower. And then also we're going to look at some growth regulator studies, because to make this as a potted plant, it already exists on the market, but the variability between the growth is quite extreme. So we need to learn how to shrink that plant or branch it out. So it's quite fun. It's a lot to learn.
Yes, it is. Tell me, tell the audience maybe like more about what a hybrid is, because I don't know that they
Sure.
understand that, but also the process of what you have to do to cross pollinate to get that breed that you're looking for and to get that what you're trying to accomplish. Talk about the process and how you actually get there and how that happens.
Okay. So a hybrid in our case, these are open pollinated. So out in nature, you have usually smaller bees, solitary bees or wind. And once the pollen from one plant arrives to another plant and crosses out, you have theoretically a hybrid, two different genetics that have combined. When you think about something like a general tomato plant, the flower is what we call perfect. It has all of these sexual organs ready to self-pollinate. So essentially, you can self-pollinate your tomato and have the same progeny. It's called selfing. You're selfing that plant. But in our case with the Ratibida, it's all open pollinated. And so when you take the seed from a cone, think of a sunflower. It's the same concept with a bunch of seeds, except our seeds are more drawn up in a cone. That's why it's called a cone flower. And when you have a couple hundred seeds, the variation can be extreme in a hybrid. So for instance, what we presume to be hybrids, more typical Ratibidas have more of a bushy habitat and more smaller stems, what we call the peduncle. But there is another species of Ratibida called Ratibida peduncularis, and that's called the naked coneflower. And it's called naked because it has a very, very long stem with no leaves. And so looking at these traits now in our greenhouse, in our field, we kind of make the assumption that we have both of those traits in one plant. So it may be a hybrid of the two. And then when you start looking at other traits, plant A has a seed that has this characteristic that's very hairy in this color, but plant B has a seed that's this color and not hairy. But then when you look at the progeny between the two, the baby, it has mixed traits. And so you start inferring things from that. And then hopefully next year we'll start doing some genetic work and we can look at the genetics of it to prove a case that these are two different plants that have combined. So
very good. Will this plant be able to self-pollinate or not? Will it still?
So it can't self-pollinate. We've worked on that. We have some pollination tents and we put them and we exclude them. We self-pollinate them and we check that they can't be pollinated. There was some older work that went on in the 1900s that showed they can't be self-pollinated, but there was no data. It just, said that. So we're checking it and writing everything down to make sure we can show the public. However, we do have some plants that we came across that are pollenless. So when you think about like cut flower, people don't want pollen, falling off and staining their area. But we have seen some of the plants in our chambers set 1 to 2 seed. Now, given that coneflower is several hundred seed, I don't know if that is just pollen contamination, 1 to 2 grains were in the air, or what we call apomixis or apomictic, which essentially sets seed without fertilization. It's a special trait that not all plants can show, and it's quite rare to come across. So we've seen some things like that. So there's quite a bit going on in the greenhouse.
You said the word peduncle.
Peduncle, that's my favorite word. I'm
like, what? So what is a peduncle?
Yeah, that's fine. I appreciate you asking that. A peduncle is, if we want to just use the simpler term stem, if you want to think about it, it is the part that connects to the floral organ. So if you think about a sunflower, that last leaf before you get to the flower, that would be the peduncle. It's a stem extension that connects the flower. So the naked Mexican flower, naked Mexican hat we were talking about, has peduncles that are extremely long, about 1 foot long, with no foliage. But on a regular Ratibida, they're only about 4 to 6 inches long, and you have foliage along the stem. So it's essentially just a flower stem, if you want to think about it like that.
Just for our northern listeners, when you said naked, you mean naked.
Yes, and I was thinking about that. I come from West Texas, and I say a lot of words, and that's the one word I get hit on is it's naked, not naked. Sorry. Yeah, you put that in. That's one word that
I'm sure there's a couple people listening like, what did he just say?
I say naked and crayon. I don't say crayon. It's crown, like Crown Royal. So
I love the diversity of people. I love the differences. I love the accents. So it doesn't bother me.
Yes. Now, when we talk about plant names, it's funny. I teach plant ID, and plant names are wildly pronounced. But the one plant name that I'm very serious about is liripe. I call it liripe. And we have a lot of students that call it liriope, especially our northern students.
Lariope. I've heard Lariope, and I'm like, I want to create it or correct it, but yeah, there's people
A
call
lot
it
of,
Lariope.
but when I heard it the first time, I was like, what are you talking about? And I've never heard
Liripe.
that. So yeah, we all pronounce things differently.
Yes, I have. I had a very, very southern lady, and this is when I was new to the landscape business, and she had a very strong accent. She was older, and she was a smoker as well. And so I'll always remember this meeting with her because she's like, "I want me some of that Lariope," and I couldn't. And I'm like, she's like, "It's everywhere. You should, you know." I mean, she kind of looked at me like I'm an idiot landscaper. And I was new to the game, but I did know what a liripe was. But I'll always remember that conversation because I was like, "Oh, she means liripe."
Liripe.
And
Yes.
I want me some of that Lariope. And that is so yeah. It makes it interesting. I mean,
It does.
you know, I'll never forget that conversation probably. So I mean, if it hadn't have been for that unique accent, it wouldn't have made an impression on me maybe. So
Sure.
I'm happy for it. But talk to me about one thing that drives me wild is when people like call me because we do lawn care, we do landscaping, we do pest control, and I'm trying to be very careful with my pest control. I believe in certain pest control, but there's also too much is bad. Everything in moderation, as my father says, including moderation. But there are some good reasons for pest control. That being said, when people call me, I've got bees, I need to get rid of them. I like absolutely like just kind of want to crap.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
that is really bad for us. I mean, for not just for Texas, for the world, for everybody, but we need bees. And so maybe explain that explain pollination to people, how it happens, and how bees and butterflies, if there's just explain that whole, there's pollinators, there's pollination, and why it's really important for us to need all of those things and how how it happens.
Sure. I mean, just to start with, before I got into horticulture, I was one of those people, that used, spray this, spray that, but it's not always needed. And we can't forget that over half of our food crops are pollinated with these insects. And there's a decline for several reasons, but one for homeowners are with pesticide use. The label's the law, and not everybody follows the label. And we tend to forget that these plants are the home. These bugs don't just live in the air, they live on the plants and in the ground. They don't just float up and have a house up there. And when we tend to spray chemicals, those have a residual on the plant that can affect things like bees and pollinators, especially when we use things that are systemic. So like, for instance, with the crepe myrtle and the bark scale, one of the few ways to get rid of that in the season is to use a systemic. But that's going to locate in the flowers. And sometimes there are some studies that show that does, can affect bees. So you have to be really conscious, but there is a time and a place, right? Termites, if you live out in the woods or around the Houston County, way out in the area, you're going to have to treat every now and then for termites, but you don't just need to go and keep spraying that same chemical everywhere. There's a chemical to be used with the mealybug. When you see really bad pests that need to be eradicated, or in our nursery, we throw stuff away that we can afford or cut it back. It was really hard for me to learn to just cut it back, just chop it back, throw the pest away, and let it regrow. There's no need to spray. I have a family member, and I'm not going to say who because he'll probably watch this, but he contacted me and said, I have pill bugs everywhere, little roly-polies as we call them, and I want to kill them. They're coming in my house, so I sprayed everything and killed them. And I'm like, no, we need those, but there's a time and a place. Some consumers, like you said, for bees, if they have they have to get rid of them. But we have to kind of educate them, and a bee swarm will move on. It's just for 1 to 2 days, and they'll keep going. Yeah. And I experienced that this year. I've never seen a bee swarm in my life, and we had one come in our greenhouse area, and 1 to 2 days it moved on. So you just got to give it time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we refuse. I know we refuse to spray any flowering plants. I mean, and it's not just because we're good people. I mean, that's actually in the TDA guidelines. It says
Absolutely.
You cannot spray blooming flowers or blooming plants.
I think it's not even consumers, and I'm speaking from background, but it's people in the industry that don't even use stuff correctly.
We see it all the time. I've obviously got plenty of competition in both lawn and pest control, and they'll come in and like what we call nuke the place. They just come in and they just nuke it, and we will not. And it's weird because we have clients that will ask for that, and I'm like, you really don't. You've got to have. It comes down to what is your pest tolerance. And we really try to educate people, like, you need to have a little bit of pest tolerance. Like,
Absolutely.
like if you have because some people are like, nope, if it's alive or creeping and crawling or has more than 4 legs, I want it dead. And I'm like, you really don't. I mean, and so we actually take the time to say, hey, this is pest control, not pest elimination. And you really don't want pest elimination. You really don't. I realize we can have some reduction. There's certain bad pests there really are that I understand. We don't need to have black widows in your house, even though spiders are really
Sure.
good for other things. I get that. Like wolf spiders, phenomenal spiders. You like they look awful, right? But because they're hairy and they jump, they're incredibly athletic for spiders, and so they'll kind of jump at you. But I mean, when's the last time you saw somebody go to the hospital over a wolf spider
Exactly.
bite?
And they're
You don't.
beneficial.
And they eat other spiders. So if you want to get rid of your black, your black widows, or you want to get out of whatever you're trying to, those guys will go after it. I mean, they're pretty aggressive. They're wolf spiders for a reason. But
When a lot of that stuff, it's just the life cycle of the ecosystem. I mean,
Correct.
you need all of those things to continue
Yeah.
that ecosystem outside. So,
hornets and wasps, different thing, right?
yes, I
Yeah.
got stung by one of those last year for the first time, and they're
Yeah.
not great.
No, those we will remove. We will, but they're really not big pollinators. A lot of people, and that's actually one of the things that I run into constantly is people actually make a mistake. They think that hornets and wasps, and they call them bees. I'm like, they're not bees. And so when you call me and say I've got bees, we have to come out and look. And we're like, actually, these are bees. We won't spray for them. We will not. If they have a hive, we will relocate.
Now, the hard thing I see is mud daubers, because they do play a critical role, especially for people that are afraid of spiders. They eat all of these spiders and take them to the nest, but they're quite unsightly when they're on your brick and
Yeah.
your foundation. So you have these trade-offs of, you don't want them there, but if you can see them elsewhere, leave them be. So
And you can actually, my understanding is you can knock those mud things down because they don't use them very long. They use them for a while. And
It's
then
a
they
short time,
It's a
yep.
very short time, and they move on to another. I think they just keep on making them, is
Yes.
my understanding. Because I cannot tell you, I've yet to knock one down on my house because they are unsightly, and like something came out of it. I mean, they're almost always empty.
yes.
And so I think they use them for a short period and move on. So you just got to deal with I'm sorry, you got to knock a little bit of dirt off your house.
Well, I think last year A&M in the gardens we have a phrase in the fall and in the early spring before things leaf out is learn to live with ugly.
Right.
You got to learn to live with no foliage and a little bit of ugly for a few weeks because the spring will come again and things come out. So
Yeah, I think I've taught my wife that.
yes,
Yes, she has to live with ugly. So, yeah, it's interesting to go over that. But yeah, talk about the pollination process. Like, let's just talk about literally walk me through this like I'm a third grader, and you're literally explaining the whole pollination process, how it works, and why it's so important to have these pollinators.
sure. So pollinators, it's quite a broad term. We normally think of bees and butterflies, which are the biggest pollinators, arguably, but beetles, moths are actually a huge pollinator, especially for night blooming plants. Flies, all different types of pollinators. So, in essence, when an insect comes upon a plant, the pollen can be somewhat sticky or stick to the insect's body. It's like it's just covered in dust. Bees are quite funny because if you watch a bee, you'll see the back of the bee legs look like two fat little legs. And I believe the term is, I think it's a corbicula, but it's essentially a little bag. Think of them like purses, and they just pack pollen onto their legs, and that's where they hold it. Solitary bees put it on their butt, essentially, so they just have a little yellow hind end. And as they go from plant to plant, when they touch another plant, pollen will either not mix, but go on top of the female organ, and it sits there. And essentially, germination happens just like a sperm and an egg, and you will have a pollen tube go down. And sometimes you'll have that hybridization process, like we talked about, and then seed set happens. And pollination might not always occur, but even besides pollination, the pollen is a huge food source. I mean, they don't just use it for flowers; they use that for food. That's what bees eat. You have beetles that eat it. I see that in our Retivita. You'll go out and you'll see beetles that just look like they ate a bag of Cheetos, and they're all covered in pollen. So the pollen, the sap, it's not just about making seed, but it's the food source. That's why you don't just want to go out and spray your plant, because them coming across the flower is food for them, just like a hummingbird with the nectar. So.
Yeah. Yep. There's another pollinator, actually, you just mentioned it, is a hummingbird. I mean, a lot of people understand that even birds can be
Absolutely. This past week, I guess they're migrating right now, and we
They
have
are.
had dozens outside. One of the big plants, we talked about good plants in the landscape. If you want hummingbirds, is Turk's cap.
They love that
Oh
plant.
man, hundreds out here in the garden, and you just hear them chirping everywhere.
Yeah,
So
I was speaking with Joseph, your garden manager, and we were just shooting the breeze outside in the garden, which is where after these interviews are done, I'm always outside. I don't want to be in here. I want to be outside. And we were just hanging out next to the Turk's cap right out here outside this window, and hummingbirds just coming in. I mean,
Everywhere.
even though we were both standing there, just coming in, and yeah, they're the hummingbirds here in Texas are. I don't know if they come from. I quite honestly haven't studied the flight of the hummingbird, but the ones here look different than the ones up north. They're definitely a different color.
yeah, they do have a good on the throat and things
Yes,
like
they're
that.
different
Yeah.
colored. They're smaller too. They seem like they're smaller. The ones up north, not the hummingbirds are small no matter what, but the ones up north seem a tad bit larger. They can also have more of a red color to them, where the ones down here have kind of a more of an earth tone. I think kind of a brown or yellow. Is that But
Yeah, brown. I've seen some green to them as well. Yeah.
some green to them. Where the ones up north, I mean, they had those colors, but I think they have some reddish ones. At least that's what it looked like, and they're a little bigger. They're amazing animals if you've ever looked up their wing speed. It's almost like you can't fathom. Like, what do you mean? It's like whatever 500. They flap their wings 500 times in a second or something. It's something I don't know.
Crazy. Yeah.
The number, I don't remember if it's that many times, but the number is hundreds of times in a second. And it's like, I can't fathom. Like, how do you get that many
Oh, and
turns?
that's again why it's so important for those flowers, because if they don't have this food source, I mean, they're out of luck. They have to have all that energy to keep flapping.
Yeah. I think Turk's cap's one of my favorite plants to put in people's. It's another one of those, kind of like the Vitex. You can put it in shade, you can put it in sun, you can water it. I've seen the thing in no irrigation make it. Once established, it's got to get established. But once that thing's established,
Can't kill it.
it's hard to kill.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's what I like plants that are like that are really difficult to kill. I mean, because we're Texans, right? We're tough. It's tough to live here. I mean, we got a lot of heat. We got the freeze still. We got no water for months. I mean, it's tough. And that's why I want my plants to be too.
Sure.
So let's go back to the wildflowers and let's talk about that. I noticed that you around here, you said, you got to learn to live with ugly. And so you've got some very ugly spots here, but they're very intentional. And I like that. But you can tell like you guys are prepping right now.
Sure.
For what? So I don't know if a lot of people understand when to plant wildflowers. I think they put seeds out in the spring, which is depends on, but typically the wrong time. Like right now is when you want to be doing. So let's educate our listeners. Like, what if people want to put out wildflowers? Like, you know what? I want to get some blue bonds. I want to get some paint flower, whatever. I mean,
Sure.
Mexican hats, whatever that is. What would be a great time? How do they do that? And when's the right time? And which ones work?
So most of our spring flowering, when we think of Texas wildflowers like Indian blanket and bluebonnet, the best time to plant that is in the fall. So when we think about that, late October, early November, no later than November. Because those plants need either a cold period to grow or they actually have to germinate, and they grow during that fall to winter period. So bluebonnets. Bluebonnets have to be outside, and they will actually grow a small, what we call a rosette growth, so a small circular type growth. And then once the spring comes, they grow even more and then shoot up their typical flower. If you come out in the gardens, you will see some of those bare, ugly spots. And what we've done is they come out and mow it pretty low, and then they seed it in wildflowers, and we have signs that show wildflower in progress so we don't trample on those flowers. You mentioned, a lot of people do plant them in the spring, just thinking like any other seed, you just put them and they'll pop up.
Right.
But
Do you know the particular blend that you guys are using right now? Is it bluebonnet, Indian paint, and Mexican hat, or is it something else?
I'm not 100% sure on the mix, but I know it's bluebonnets, Indian blankets. Man, there was one other that's escaping me.
The wine cups?
The wine cups are definitely out here. I can't. Linaria, it's not Ligularia, starts with an L, but some other type of wildflower. For wildflower seed sources, one of the big ones is Fredericksburg Seed Farms, but I really encourage people to find native seed mixes. That's a big deal. For instance, I would not want to buy wildflower seeds from Arkansas and
No.
bring them down. They're not for our area, and you want to have seeds that have been produced somewhat locally if you can.
You're correct. You're dead on. They really should be local. Like just kind of the example we used earlier, like you've got that loblolly pine that's here. That's from that, what's it, the Lost Pine or the, yeah, is it Lost Pines?
I believe so.
And that pine tree is identical to the pine tree 80 miles east of here in Houston, but it's different because that tree became accustomed to drought, more less water. So that tree is, even though it's, I mean, it's the same, I mean, loblolly is loblolly, but yet that one does better here because it's become accustomed to drought. So plants will evolve, and
Absolutely.
that one has. And so I think a lot of people don't understand that, like just how important it is to like get local. I'm not just talking about buying local for your food source, but even your seeds. Explain, I kind of just explained a little bit myself. Sorry, I stole some of your thunder, but I know you're gonna be able to go more in depth, but why do people want to buy those seeds locally?
Sure. I think what just a lumping word we talk about is like acclimated. It's acclimated to this area. For instance, with bluebonnets, with lupines, they're very different up north. You know, you see very large flowering lupines, but just general Texas bluebonnets, if you were to be growing a batch of them 2 states north in a very different zone for multiple generations, and then you brought that down here, it would not have that same heat tolerance.
Correct.
Inversely, if we took a bluebonnet from here and took it up north, it's not going to have that same cold tolerance. Now, they don't have a cold tolerance the same in general, but it's the same idea that over time and generations, those plants tend to stabilize or improve in that environment. So when you take it out and you put it somewhere else, it's quite hard. An example I always learned growing up was, you know, people that sell palm trees in the trailer, when they just come up to your area and sell all the palm trees, is you have to be a little careful because some will grow in your area, but most are just brought from way down in the valley and they're not acclimated to your area yet. So growers can take a chance and grow them, but a homeowner, you might have a 50-50 shot if it's going to continue to live. So the native seeds, though, I think it's more of the idea just of trying to stay local with pollinators, things that can pollinate that specific flower. It's acclimated to that area, whether it's a flower, flower size, flower color, or just a trait of the plant, cold and heat tolerance, like we talked about. But I think the biggest for our area is heat and drought,
Yes.
all across all of Texas. And if that won't perform here, there's no need. Now, I'm not saying that you can't buy seed from out of state and it's not going to grow. I do it too. But you want to try to stay as local to our state or as close
Agreed.
to Texas as we can.
Yeah.
So
I agree. I mean, yeah, it's like you're right. I mean, people I think try to prove me wrong all the time. Like, oh, look at it, I got that plant to grow. I'm like, good job. I mean, and you will, and you probably babied the heck out of it, and I'm glad you did because you got outside and you worked in the soil and you amended stuff. So I mean, all those are really positive. So if that's what it took, but in general, that plant, if you just stuck it out there, probably
yeah.
it's not going to make it.
Well,
So,
like for instance, with our Mexican hat, our Retibitas, in our field experiment when we were doing a diversity panel, we have plants from I think 4 to 5 states. The majority are Texas, but we have some from the Carolinas, Nebraska, and Michigan. And we planted them last year. And for those people that were in Texas, that was our worst summer so far, very hot and dry in our area at least. And we planted these plants almost on June 1st, so during the heat of it all.
Rifta,
Yes, it was a rough time.
I don't recommend that usually.
No, I should have done it a little bit sooner, but on the inverse, it showed you the things that were strong. And
yeah,
just
yeah.
about everything lived through it except for the Nebraska and Michigan plants. They didn't even live past the seedling stage because when you plant them in the field, our hypothesis is it was just too hot and they all burned up. But every other plant that was from Texas, so they thrived and they did just fine. So that was kind of an example for us as well with that seed
Yeah.
sourcing.
People understand that it's okay to go out in your garden and fail. And some people get, now as a landscaper, I'm not allowed to.
Sure.
I'm expected that every plant I put out there is going
Has
to
to
live,
grow.
has to grow, has to look beautiful, has to look great at all times. And so I've got a very unfair comparison, but it's kind of, death is a very normal thing in plant life, right? In just horticulture, death, and some of it's good, and sometimes you actually learn from that. I get that, and sometimes you find, hey, that plant just doesn't belong there. You know, like I jokingly tell people, even with turf grass, I'm like, don't put turf grass where turf grass doesn't want to grow.
No.
I mean, you know, how many times we've installed turf grass where I tell people, I'm like, how many times have you put sod down? And they're like, oh, 3 times. I'm like, how about we stop? You know, and they're like, well, I want
Fourth
sod
time's
there.
the
I'm like,
charm.
they're like, no, I mean it. And I'm like, well, it made it three years last year. I'm like, right. And we finally got one of those freezes, I bet. And you have a lot of shade here. So you probably got some fungal activity in the fall, and that winter kill wiped it out. And that's probably what happens about every 3 years. And they're like, yeah, it is about every 2 or 3 years. I'm like, when you put down fresh sod that came out of a field that was perfectly tended to, and you put it down in your yard, it's going to look good for a while. I don't know, a year, 2 years, I don't know,
Yeah.
months, but it's going to eventually acclimate or try to acclimate. Probably won't make it. And so let's go with landscaping. Like, I'm a big fan of, I was going to ask if I could put you on the spot, maybe ask you what are some of your best shade plants. And before you answer, because I think more and more people, like underneath the tree is a great example. Like, that's just not the best spot for, turf typically, but you can landscape beautiful things underneath the tree. Or maybe if there's a side of your house, it just gets 1 hour of sun because maybe just only the noon hour. But there's a lot of things that do great in the shade that are landscaping, but they're not turf. And I think a lot of people, does that make sense?
Sure.
So maybe if you don't mind, I mean, what are some of your favorite, ornamentals in the shade area that do really well in the shade?
I think it depends on the look you're going for. So like for height, I think one of my favorite landscape plants in the shade is Ligularia, or some people call it Farfugium. It's like the giant tractor seat plants. That was one of the hot plants in Texas last year. Lots of growers are scheduling to grow that. It's quite versatile, and there's even like the leopard spotted ones. You get some height to it, but you can also have giant cultivars and small cultivars. So I like that for the height look. And it can have some flower, given if you have a little bit more light or some part shaded area. Low-lying shaded plants, most people are averse to it, but I like Asian jasmine. I mean, a nice mat of Asian jasmine looks good, but it tends to, over time, get sparse, or if you have freezes, you have to restart. So I'm a sucker for like the matted Asian jasmines. Another good shade.
You really do. You are kind of tend towards that English look. You know that.
I really do. I took a trip this summer to a Southern Garden Society trip, and I was really suckered into old Southern gardens and English gardens.
I'm
So
picking up on that.
yeah, it's pretty interesting. But other shade plants, they don't. People tend to forget plants can grow in the shade, but they're not going to look like they would in the sun.
Correct. No
So
blooms, maybe.
no blooms. You'll still get that foliage, but you might not get the blooms. So one that I've been into is like older chrysanthemum varieties. You'll still have a lot of nice foliage. You might not get flowers, but the nice thing that we try to tell people is think about flowering during the winter. So, once your tree canopy drops, you're going to have some filtered light. And if it's a winter flowering plant, you can have some nice color. So live with the greenery in the summer. And then in the winter, once you get some deciduous leaf drop, you have some light coming in down there.
Sure.
So
Have you had any luck with the Lenten rose by chance? Have you ever?
I haven't grown that. I do take care of it at a house, but I don't grow it myself. So it's kind of finicky, I think.
It might be a tishwarm here. Like, it's almost a tishwarm for us.
Yeah.
I think it's we get away with it in DFW, but it's funny. We're only 2.5, 3 hours apart between DFW and College Station. And that is enough of a drive to you just bust into another zone, and like I said, there's just that little of a distance, that 3 hours, we're in the same state and we're only 3 hours apart, not even 3 hours. And it's already like, there's certain plants
Absolutely.
that I can't have that you can, and vice versa.
Well, we try to teach that, Dr. Arnold, especially to our students in his class for Plants for Sustainable Landscapes, because some students tend to forget, it's a rose, it's a gardenia, it's an azalea. We can just put that in West Texas. No.
No.
Every area has its own
Yeah.
plants in Texas.
Yeah. Yep. We try with Texas being in the boom. It's a boom state right now. I mean, there's more people. I think this is one of the most heavily moved in states. One of the top
Yes.
two, I believe. It's one of the most heavily moved in states. I know at one point, this is a crazy number, but at one point, DFW alone was getting 500 move-ins a day. And that was every day, like the whole Dallas-Fort Worth area. And that is where I would get a lot of requests for, can I have a rhododendron? I'm like, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Can I have this? Hostas, they do make it. They look terrible in my opinion. Once you've seen a hosta in Boston, you don't want to see a hosta. I mean, that's the way that's the only way
Yeah,
you want to see it.
yeah, exactly.
The hostas in Boston are amazing. Same with hydrangeas, any of the acidic plants. I mean, because the soil there is very acidic. You got acid rain, you got acidic soils, but your hydrangeas, your roses, all those, I mean, they're 10 times what they are down here. And people move here and like they try to bring their plants with them. And I'm like, you really need to start trying to find some love in our local plants. And I know that maybe they're not as showy as your acidic plants, which typically do bloom more. Yes, I agree, but there is a beauty here that I think it is. And it took me, even as a landscaper, it took me a little bit of time to understand that, figure that out. Cause I wanted what I wanted, I want,
Sure.
and I would also, I mean, you grow up with plants. Maybe there's some plants that are sentimental. Like my grandmother had this plant in her house. I'm like, well, your grandmother's house was in Boston. So, it's going to be
Gonna be a
really,
little tough.
it's going to be a little tough. And so, I want you to kind of explain that. Like a lot of people understand like the different biomes here. I mean, it's very diverse. Like you literally can drive an hour in Texas and have like, I've got one in DFW. There's that line that goes through that right as you cross where over to Weatherford, Aledo, where it's west of Fort Worth. So it's considered part of Fort Worth, but right when you cross that line, the soil pH jumps a full point, I'd say 0.5%. I mean, it
Oh,
goes
wow.
in the nines. It becomes more rocky. The soil becomes even more alkaline. And I mean, we're right next door. It's all high up there, but it's even higher there. It's harder to grow stuff. So maybe explain to people just how important it is to find the plants that work in your area, and you've got to really, I mean, because even your Texas superstars, which part of Texas? I mean, does that make sense? You have to kind of look
Sure.
because people say, hey, this plant will work in Texas. It says it's a superstar. I'm like, for Houston, it will. And so does that make sense? So maybe talk a little bit about that.
So I think it's a lot of trial and error. And, we talked about annuals and perennials and cost wise, but if you want to have a pretty yard, a pretty landscape, and can be defined many ways, but it takes trial and error. And I think most consumers want to just start big and bold. Go buy the 15-gallon shrub that's just huge. And there's purposes for that, especially with annuals and small things. You want to just get the petunia basket that's just in full bloom and waved out. But you want to start small. In my opinion, it's always better to buy the small things, start cheaper and trial that and see if it grows. And most areas, especially here in the gardens, we grow plants this year and see what grows well for next year. So we trial and error. Not everything works, and that's part of the plants. But like you're mentioning, some of the people that come from out of state, from California, from more northern areas, Pacific Northwest, they have a sentimental plant. I take care of a gentleman's garden here, Dr. William Welch, and he has a lot of sentimental plants or plants with provenance areas that came from. And those plants take a lot of effort to grow. I mean, we have a lot of input. We're always acidifying that soil. We're putting something special on the plant for it to grow. But generally in the landscape, it's just one thing. It's one special plant, and everything else is Texas native plants or plants that'll grow in our area. And like you were mentioning with the superstars, yes, most of these plants, they are trialed all across the state, but like we mentioned with shade, it'll still grow, but it might not look as pretty or floriferous as it does in Dallas as it's going to in San Antonio or Odessa. They might have a different look. So it takes some time. And I think, unfortunately, the consumer can't always be patient with that, with money. I mean, we don't want to wait 1 to 2 years to see a pretty yard. It should be pretty this spring, not 3 springs from now. But being patient and learning to live with that is, I think, part of the payoff. I think when you go to anybody's garden, a nice estate with a beautiful garden, a botanical garden, and ask them, it took years to get it like that.
It
It's
does.
not like it just was one spring. And it's a constant improvement with plants. And so, like I tell my family, I'm always, the person they come to with questions about what do I do with this, and it'll take time. It's not an instant thing. You have to baby it and culture it. But with some of the plants, I think going to nurseries, it's harder at big box stores because they don't always carry the things that grow to our area. I encourage people to try to shop local, because your local garden centers really will try to cater towards your area. They've been in it for a while. And I don't just want to shame all the big box stores, because they also sometimes carry our native plants. But in general, our local nurseries are carrying what grow in our area.
Yes. It's funny because people, as a landscaper, people are like, I can buy that plant, maybe I'm charging $70 to install a plant because that's the cost of the plant, the installation, the labor. And hey, I got to add some profit to it because that's what I'm here for, is to make money in those areas. But they're like, I can buy that plant for $20. I'm like, at Home Depot, I'm like, you sure can. You sure can. And you might want to, but I don't know where it came. I know where my stuff came from. I know the quality of the
Absolutely.
grower. Like, I know who my grower was, where that plant could have come from Minnesota. And I don't know if how well it's going to do. Is it acclimated to here? Just kind of like we talked about, that loblolly is all over Texas, but it's weird how some of them evolve differently. And people have to understand that's kind of where your professional landscaper or your professional horticulturist come. That's why it's good to consult. Like, you need to get these from the right grower. You need to get these from the right area so that, because they're not all created equal.
Yeah. And I think that's, I actually heard for the first time, I was always very opposed to big box stores because they really took the business from the local centers. But I never thought about big box stores really opened up the possibilities for all consumers to buy plants. Before, they never, drove by that garden center because it wasn't on their part of town. But now when they went into Walmart or Lowe's to get hardware or milk, they saw a plant. And so it opened that possibility, but still, you need to go back to your horticulturist, your landscapers, and get advice. I mean, those are the trusted people in that field. So,
Right. Yeah. It's worth it. You spend a little bit extra money to get it
Yes.
done right. And that way because the cost that you're saving, you're not saving because of the death. You're going
Absolutely.
to have dead plants. You're going to have some bad situations happen. So you're going to be replacing things. And so there's your cost, there's
Yeah.
your cost out the window. But, I wanted to go over the ornamental trees versus shade trees. I think a lot of people, like, when I know you hear the word, that's why I said earlier, what's the definition of ornamental to you? And you immediately went with beautiful flowers, but there's ornamental trees, which are, and I want you to kind of define that versus your typical shade trees. Let's go over the difference of that so people understand that.
So when I think of ornamental trees, just to throw out fruit trees, and this isn't an all-catching example, but ornamental pear trees or ornamental other type of fruit trees that aren't necessarily going to set your edible fruit, but we still use them for ornamental purposes. Or for instance, in the spring or in the fall when they come out with beautiful foliage, or even seed set. I mean, it's not just the pretty flowers, it's other characteristics of that make it an ornamental tree. So like with our smoke bush outside, when it comes out with the panicles of these seeds, and then the seeds set, it just looks like these plume of smoke. And so we prize that for that ornamental characteristic. But then under shade trees, I mean, when I think of a shade tree, I just think of a big blob of green. I need to have a dense canopy for shade. But with ornamental trees, we're usually much smaller. When a small tree is usually about 10 to 15, if not much smaller than that. And we have some type of ornamental purpose. So with crepe myrtles, it's the flowers on them. It's not just the foliage. So, but again, like I mentioned, it's not just the flowers. It can be the foliage, the pretty maroon foliage on a smoke bush, the seed set on something like Colereterias, and even the fall color or the spring color. So
Yeah.
that's I think some people have a difficult time understanding, and I really never thought about it this way, but trying to pepper trees in your landscape that have different colors at different time of the year. You don't just want all crepe myrtles, because when they drop, you have a bare landscape.
Yeah.
So try to pepper trees in your landscape, ornamental trees that you have different colors going on at different times of the year.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Mexican plum. Love
Yes.
that. Love that tree. Just the canopy alone is gorgeous because it almost looks like a mushroom. Like, it's got that perfect bottom, and then the shape alone is interesting to me. Like, people are like, well, and the blooms only are like, I don't know, 2 to 3 weeks maybe, but I like it better than the Bradford pear.
Yeah.
I like it much. A lot of people get mad at me for saying that. Like, well, the Bradford pear is beautiful in the spring. I'll give it that. But man, it's just a weak tree. It's known to rip, tear.
Yeah.
It doesn't live long. I know
Yes.
they've gotten, Bradford pear, they've got more the Cleveland pear, which is kind of replaced it. I mean, they've got other pear varieties now, but that Mexican plum is durable. And in the bark, a lot of people I like the bark. Like, it's a very different colored bark. It's got a kind of jagged look. It's kind of a gnarly looking tree.
It is, and we actually teach that in class. It's one of our ID features. We have Mexican plum all around the gardens, and when we teach that, we talk about the bark. It has that interesting, almost kind of horizontal striation to the bark, and really patchy. It's not smooth at all whatsoever.
No,
So,
no, it looks aggressive. It looks like,
Yes.
I mean, you climb that thing, you're gonna get tore up. I mean, whether you're up in the tree or whether you're on the what do you call it? Not the stem, but not the peduncle, but the
Oh, I know.
the base of the tree.
Yes, the trunk of it. Yeah.
When you're climbing that up, it's just aggressive. So
Well, I think that's a part of ornamental aspect. Proven Winners does a really good job of this on social media. And again, we can't always feature things that they can up north, but during the winter, having seeds that are still set on the plant or your bark characteristic is part of the landscape. It's not always foliage. It is the stem and the trunk is part of your look in the landscape.
yeah, I agree. The Mexican plum actually does produce plums for me, and I have that now. Not for edible for you and I suppose we could, but I don't. It's not. I don't think we would. But I will tell you that something else is getting them because I think it's mainly birds. But
They eat them all up. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I had plums all over, and all of a sudden they're gone. They're just gone.
These were all about fully loaded, I think about 2 weeks ago, and every
Mine
week
were too.
there's much less.
and then just gone. And so I don't know, the squirrels, birds, bugs, but they're feeding something, so I don't mind that. I've always questioned whether deers eat them. Not that they can get up there, but I mean, I didn't know if they dropped. If deer
Oh, they
ate 'em.
do. They drop a lot.
Yeah. So I don't have a lot of plums in my ground because they don't make it, and that's how much those get cleaned up. But I like the ornamental trees. If you do it right, and you got to be smart, but I love my Japanese maples. I really do. I don't know if they quite do well down here.
Not really here. I think about DFW is our limit.
That's
for
the
it,
question. That is, and we're even questionable. However, if you pack them in peat moss, make it very acidic. I've got them on my property, and they do well. And I think they look great if you put them underneath another tree. If you can get them in the shade of another large shade tree, that Japanese maple will, and just make sure they're not in the afternoon sun. I know that people point to them all like, that's in the afternoon sun. I'm like, but just think how awesome it would look if it wasn't,
Sure.
And so if you can get that with morning sun only, the Japanese maples do well. Vitex, I cannot influence enough people to get that tree because I think it's a huge, it just does not have the issues that say the crepes have,
Yeah.
and so it's not, it's so much more disease resistant and just durable. And so, but your crepe myrtles, Vitex, Mexican plums, Japanese maples, I'm a big fan of your ornamental trees, and you typically don't have even the turf loss underneath as well, like you actually, because they're not shade trees.
Yeah, they're not going to fully shade it out. And I think the nice thing about the Vitex, I believe it was Monrovia, they have some dwarf Vitex, and they only grow about 5 to 6 foot tall. So people that love Vitex but can't fit that in their landscape, there's plants for you. You can still have that same look.
Right.
So,
Yeah. What is your favorite tree, if I can ask?
oh man, my favorite tree. Probably a pecan tree. I had one in my backyard, and I hate pecan tree, but I love pecan tree. It's a love hate.
All right, I'm interested. Tell me more.
The reason I like pecan because they're so large. The foliage they have, I like the leaf has we call a falcate leaf, so it has an interesting turn to it. But just the canopy of it. The house I grew up in as a kid, we had a giant pecan tree in the backyard, and that was our shade for the house. And I was really fond of that. I guess another tree just being fond of is mimosa. We had a mimosa in our backyard, and it came over our grill. And through high school, that was like my little hangout spot. I would sit beneath the mimosa and grill, and it was just pretty, and it was tranquil to me.
I love that tree too.
But I hated the pecan tree because the dang squirrels. When we had moved in, the backyard was so neglected over time, and so our soil was just pecan mulch essentially.
Sure.
So you couldn't walk in it barefoot. So they can get quite messy.
They
but
are.
the shade it provided, and then again back to the ecosystem services. I mean, it was feeding the squirrels, and you're feeding the wildlife. And we never watered it in West Texas. It was just established, and it was huge. So it provided us shade, squirrels food, but also a little messy sometimes. So
I recommend that tree to go if you got a big yard and you put it in the far back corner. Just get
Yes.
like listen, you don't want this thing around your house, even though I know like it's kicking out there. If you want shade for the house, I got to find some other out. But if you've got a back corner, you got a field. Let me put it out there. Like you got even a wet spot because they can take a lot of moisture. A lot of people don't know that. But yeah, I don't, right up against the house, I typically don't.
this was about 15 feet from our house. Yes. And so
And they're
we
messy,
had
yeah.
lightning strike it twice, and that was a concern because when it's on fire next year, and then limb drop on your house. So they were a little messy. So
Very good. We're out of time. This has been an awesome conversation about ornamentals and what you're doing. Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you.
of course,
So-
yeah, thank you.